Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. We're really excited to host you today. My name's Paul Curry. I look after the Urban Systems Unit at ICLEI Africa, and I'm really excited to be joined by our colleagues from the African Circular Economy Network, who are going to be guiding us through this series on building capacity for circular economy innovation. And the series is going to explore several different themes about improving business acumen and business practice for circular economy. So welcome. We've made this a workshop style to ensure that we can see you and participate, not just have a blank screen as a webinar. So I know that there's going to be a session towards the end where we'd like to welcome your reflections into this conversation. And we'd also like to request at the end of this, you let us know if the session was useful through answering a short survey. So the main reason we're interested as ICLEI Africa in exploring this topic is because we want to help local governments to improve their enabling environments for new and growing businesses. And so the insights shared here will be really valuable for us to help guide cities on their process, as well as to support fellow businesses and startups on their journey. So I'm going to hand over in a moment to our colleagues. I just want to say that the session is being recorded for the benefit of other participants who've registered but aren't able to join at this time slot. So I hope that's fine. And please do share your name and organization in the chat, just so we have a sense of who's joining us. And then I hope our facilitators will give some good time for conversation towards the end. So with that, I'm going to invite Bezawit, our colleague from ASEN, to introduce the topic of discussion today. Thank you, Beza.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beza here from the African Circular Economy Network. For those of you who are not aware of what ASEN stands for by now, ASEN is a nonprofit organization which is actively promoting circular expertise and knowledge in more than 30 plus African countries, and of course, globally on circular economy issues. Please feel free to visit our website on what we do in more details, and the details are in the chat box on the left, on the right side. And welcome to today's session. So our seminar, this session is part of a 6 series of events under the title Building Capacity for Circular Economy. And we do really hope that we will be having an engaging and more interactive session, and you'll learn a lot from the sessions. And you'll definitely join us for the next sessions too. But just to give you a highlight of what today's session is, the title is Supply Chain, Circular Supply Chain Model, bringing the transition from linear to circular. It will focus on how circular concepts and principles can guide and influence the production and manufacturing of goods and services. And with this also in parallel as well, the consumption and behavior of consumers. That's because that's something that could possibly or potentially drive the supply chain. It will also address circular alternatives on how raw materials are extracted, products are designed, produced, transported, distributed, the whole value chain until it's disposed along the value chain. The objective of the session is just to get an overview of the circular global supply chain and how the trends and the key barriers and opportunities are shaping the whole platform, I would say, and to unlock whatever opportunities are there. And we will have also a very interesting session where we'll have how Africa can fit into this regional and global value chain. So once again, welcome, and I do hope that you'll find this session more interesting and engaging. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks so much, Beza. I hope, Beza, you'll join me in moderating the conversation and adding your reflections on the panelists. I'd like to invite Sneha and Chris forward to offer their first insights on our topic today. Perhaps Sneha, you can go first.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. Very excited to share what I know about circular supply chains and eagerly looking forward to learn more from the other panelists of the event. My name is Neha Kumari, and today I'll be sharing a little bit from my experience. I'm the head of industry trends at Circular Supply Chain Network. Our founder started working on this network to create a community to bring leaders across the world together on one platform where we could share what companies around the world are actually doing to make circular economy happen, and how powerful supply chains can be to actually make this a reality. So I have a short presentation and would love to share. Um, I hope you're able to see my screen. Please let me know if you're not.
Perfect, we see it well.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'll start with the first slide where I actually wanted to share what our supply chains today look like, which is mostly linear, wherein we take materials from our planet, we make it into products, and then eventually we create waste in this process. So it is very linear, saying we have customer, supplier, and pretty much it goes along this line. And what circular economy says that it doesn't have to be a line. It could be loop. It could be a circle, and they could be it could be circular. And what circular economy says that there is more value to be had and be able to bring those materials back in our supply chain. Today we have waste, and what we believe in is tomorrow we will have value. So what does circular economy really mean for our business today? And I would really cover a few topics on what it looks like, what are the key components are, and I'll start with a short story and short places that might interest you. But to start with, the picture that you see here is, so a lot of cars parked, and doing some research, we found out that the average car actually spends 92% of their life being parked. And almost all of us, specifically in North America, own a car. And so the concept is, wouldn't it be great if we and what actually, like, to take an example, what Uber did. Uber, instead of selling a car, is actually selling a service of transportation. And so now during this process, we are adding economic value throughout the day. So that's the concept, where actually service becomes important instead of ownership, mass ownership of the goods that we own today. And in supply chain, I think more about processes, and I would like to see what, also share what smart processes would look like. This picture that you see here is 1970 in Denmark. A group of manufacturers wanted to find fresh water, affordable water, to use their in their manufacturing processes. And this is what you see here is salt water, which is collected, which is of course not very useful in manufacturing processes. So what they did was they actually came together, and they co-located, and they put their factories next to each other, so they can now share use of these materials, share these materials amongst themselves. And this is how it looks like. And even now it exists. So they have they have expanded past their water to energy exchanges, and now even material exchanges. And collectively, they are actually saving about $100 million a year. And if we have this exchange, we have more stable inputs as we have as specifically during COVID, we learned the lessons. We saw this huge disruptions in our supply chain and getting materials, specifically our offshore suppliers, and getting materials from them on time and meeting our customer demand. But in this model, if we have co-located, our lead times go down. Our forecast doesn't have to have that kind of vulnerability where we are not able to meet demand. And so the disruptions are less. And this will become key over, as we keep going, and especially after our learnings from COVID-19, the pandemic and the disruptions, because the elements that we use today for our global economy is dwindling. It is important to come up with ways where we can actually exchange these materials. Now, talking about smart assets, we could also start exploring smart processes, and I'll come to smart processes soon, but wanted to share about materials a little bit. There are two types of materials that we can exchange and circulate, and one of the categories that you see here is renewable, which is anything that goes back in the biosphere. So the green side, compost, water, heat, and the technical materials are anything that will not go in the biosphere, meaning the metals and the plastic. And we believe that someday by 2030, and I hope we could actually talk plastic, plastic as a renewable item, but today it's not. And now what you see here, it's called a butterfly diagram. This is from the Ellen MacArthur organization. They put this together. And how this works is you want to keep the smallest circles running as long as possible. So on the green side, we have this area of cascade. So how much can we reuse this bio and renewable materials? And on the blue side, you see all the technical materials that I explained about. And what you will be doing is increasing use of these of these materials along the circles that you see. And then maybe we share it and it goes on and keeps going on from there. So you will, as you can see here, you will actually see recycle is the last resort, especially in circular economy. The idea is that the wider the circle, the more resources it takes. And often the value of the material goes down and the value of material decreases. We want to keep an item at its highest economic input or value for the economy as we can. So as consumers, let me share a fun fact for you today. An electric screwdriver actually has a use life of about 15 minutes per day. So we can think about 10,000 people all having the same electric screwdriver, and they have all to make all the screwdrivers, there's metal involved, plastic involved, and we only use it probably 15 minutes. So coming back to the concept that I was explaining with Uber, like what if we can shift to something like a tool library? So now all those 10,000 people could actually come check out the same item, use it. And so now the value of the service goes up, and we really did not need to use so much materials to make a product that was probably just being used for 15 minutes per day. So we have dramatically reduced the amount of materials we need, and the item is adding quite a bit of economic value on its own. So similarly, we can, add this idea in our supply chains. We need to buy our own warehouses, factories, fleets, and we need to shift that model to outsourcing. And that could be a version of sharing our resources. So the challenge is to start ramping this up and actually start to think about it more. So now, what about these smart processes? So the role of technology in enabling us to get this point in time in 2030 is notable, and depending on which analyst firms you ask, I think Gartner says that by 2030 we will all be in circular supply chains. McKinsey is a little aggressive. They think it will be 2025. Why I keep saying about 2030 is today what I'm trying to present is our vision that we will get to this model by 2030. We believe we could, and if the steps that steps taken by us in each of our roles, whatever we perform in our own organizations. If we could take those steps, we could actually get there. In the next slide, I would actually like to share a little about what we have been perceiving Earth as. So consider Earth as your warehouse, and imagine us continuously taking materials without actually giving it back. Someday that warehouse will be empty. And so what are we doing to actually making sure that we are consciously using the materials that we are taking from our planet? And in this process, actually, are we doing anything to give it back? So what does a circular supply chain really look like? And I would like to share few characteristics of circular supply chain. So the first one that you can see here is lean. And I believe most of us supply chain professionals, sorry, my voice is breaking a little bit. Most of us supply chain professionals are aware of this term, which is lean. So pretty much it's designing waste out, and it and it is very, so ours, we believe that circular supply chains will be very pretty much similar to lean. And what the concept here is, we monetize waste. So lean says that you eliminate waste, while circular economy really says that you could actually find value in waste. So you know how in your value stream mapping you have, if you have ever done a value stream mapping, you do have value streams and waste streams. And what we envision is in future, in a circular economy, you will have two material streams: primary material streams and a secondary value streams. So the secondary value streams is pretty much what we call waste today, and it shouldn't be. We could actually find ways to bring like someone an organization's waste could actually add value to some other industry. Today we'll look at our processes and see, how we can make it efficient by using less consumable, less packaging, less energy, less water. And circular supply chain says we need to look at the whole system and see how we do use less overall. So currently there's an unfortunate state that we are in, where we are shipping actually items thousands of miles across the planet. For example, we grow pears in Argentina, we ship it to Asia for packaging, that we actually ship here. So like, try going to a shop, and if you actually buy some packaged strawberries or fruits, take a look like what did passport really look like, which countries or continents did it really travel to. And the idea of our economy is to use less of global transportation. And the second characteristics of circular supply chain that we believe is visible. So after we lean it out, no one really today talks about circulating goods. The waste from one operation feeds another, and circulating goods in this process. So every process becomes a source of, every operation becomes a source of raw materials. And if everyone is now a source of raw material, like everything now has value. And who defines value for us? Like even today, like customers, our customers are the ones who design value for us. And so if we have, as I said, if we have two value streams, primary and secondary, we of course have more customers out there. And so we look at now we are actually selling more and being at the same time actually being profitable in our businesses as well. The third one is actually being productive. So if we need to tell like all these new customers when their material is coming, if you look around, every single material around you has the potential to add value. And the idea is we need to know where exactly these materials are and connect it to the industries who would actually need it. Now, this must be starting looking familiar to you all. Say our customer gives us the forecast and have order horizons, and we sort out how we manage the supply chain and bring the materials in and manage our our logistics back to our customers too. The tricky part now, as I said, in our value stream map, we have primary value stream and secondary value stream. We now have two customers. So the value stream customers and the waste stream customers. So now it has, now it becomes a delicate dance. So we want to make sure whose order is more important, and, determining production priorities, which determines what inputs we'll need, and all of this while you are reducing the amount that you are, and you're adding, like, you're extracting value of every single raw material or material you sourced while making your product. The next one is reasonable. So, being able to harvest.
Can I just nudge for maybe a minute and a half?
Yeah, for sure. You want to pause?
No, I can just for a minute and a half left, and then we must turn to Chris.
Oh, I just have a minute and a half left. Sure, got it. Regional is pretty much, harvesting, transforming, and using materials regionally. So all items, for example, what you see on your phone has actually traveled to the moon and back. So we need to stop shipping so far. This picture that you see here is of Cape Town, and what they're trying to do is actually balance the idea of industrial symbiosis. So can we repurpose with and harvest and transform the materials regionally? There is a lot of value. Some argue that it might be expensive, and it can be due to market failures. But if we look at the total landed costs, it will actually work better for us. And the last one is actually being flexible. So the range of material types, quality, so being able to manage our production, being flexible there, and quickly switch among products and manufacturing lines can handle both new and remanufacturing, with more and more towards actually the side of remanufacturing. So the concept today is coming out is biofacturing, and the research done shows that out of 100 billion ton of materials coming in global economy every year, 60 billion tons can actually come from biology, and really doesn't need to be coming from the elements of the planet. So that is super exciting, right? So we should be ready to handle different types of materials and in our own operations. And another interesting concept is what is if we didn't like the idea of describing materials by the use, like how well we start describing materials on how well they conduct energy, and how we can, and that's when we can understand the use of AI here. I did wanted to give you a quick example of, say, in just an example, quick example of, say you are a sourcing manager, and what can you do in your daily role to actually make this happen? Say, for example, your boss comes in and says that, hey, material costs are going up and no one has enough supply. How would you solve this problem? And what you would do is you actually now are looking at energy exchanges as we look about. So you are not looking at virgin commodity prices. You are now decoupled from growth and replace that by material exchange markets. And then you also set up water sharing with your nearby factories, and you use an analytics to reduce your usage, and you have flexible operations that can take different quality, material quality and variation. So you have more options in keeping the line running. And you have taken created a take back program, so your supply chain can remanufacture and add, and in addition, make new items. So no robots are going to take our job in 2030. We'll actually need more skilled labor when it comes to remanufacturing, because maintenance and repair labor is really needed. And you actually also join a pilot program to test use of electric fleet to eliminate your dependency on gas or petrol. And so by doing this in your current role, this is like a small part we all can play in making this happen. Today in sourcing, our strategy is more stressed on reducing the costs rather than really looking at secondary value streams. And if our strategy changes a little bit and we start looking at sourcing secondary materials, we could actually make it happen. This was a quick example. I know I don't have a lot of time left. But would love to take any questions you have. I do have many interesting concepts, so happy to share my presentation as well if anyone needs it. But thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to engaging and learning from other panelists as well.
Thanks so much, Sneha, and please do either jot down a question in a notebook or throw it into the chat. We'll have some time at the end for people to speak and request questions of our inputs. Chris, over to you. You self-confessed hard to keep at 10 minutes, but please do give us the nuts and bolts.
I'll give you the nuts and bolts. Thank you, everyone. Yes, just to explain that I'm in Mauritius at the moment. Now, the opportunity in terms of understanding global supply chain is really about looking at the fact that every country really is an island. So we're trying to look at understanding the developments between looking at the issues around circular economy and what we can actually do around that. Essentially, I'm Chris White. I'm from the African Circular Economy Network. I run several other companies in South Africa, abroad, Mauritius, America. But my focus is circular economy, particularly looking at project development. So a lot of this particular proposal or this presentation here is looking at numbers of different elements of that. I'm going to skip through to the supply chain side, but I think it's important in terms of maybe chatting about the situation that I'm in at the moment. So yes, I'm in Mauritius. Mauritius is a beautiful island. It's gorgeous outside, so I'm sweating like a pig here. But the opportunity in terms of understanding where we are since 2020, since COVID, understanding what's happened with regards to global supply chains. And it's not all just COVID. We need to understand that there's been this transition. We've been looking at it since COP17, COP21, COP26 recently, looking at understanding the opportunities or the limitations and the restrictions in terms of what it means with regards to looking at resource management, understanding the waste, and looking at those resources. But it really is about trying to see, if you look at an island like Mauritius, the impact in terms of COVID, where they closed the borders, is enormous. Most of the GDP comes from tourism. And although there's a thriving industry here, it depends on what's coming into and out of the country. And that's very much the same in terms of a region, a province, a country, an island. And what we've seen with COVID and global supply chains is that we're now living in a very different world. I gave a presentation a while ago talking about the fact that in South Africa at the moment, we mine, I think, about 67 million tons of iron ore every year. We export 58 million tons of that. We can't do that anymore. I mean, the simple reality is that we've got to look at the change of the entire sector. So we're already looking at the migration of the shipping sector into a circular economy, a low carbon economy. So we're looking at hydrogen systems, we're looking at different applications, but more importantly, we're trying to stop moving raw materials around. So, we can't afford the fact that things are getting stuck in the Suez Canal, let alone the issues around COVID where the entire shipping industry came to a halt. But looking at how we maximize the use of the resources we have available to us. And to do that, we need to look at many different things. So I will whip through my presentation. We've got to take it beyond just understanding that it's about resources and recycling. There's a huge amount of input in terms of this with regards to the impact. So looking at social upliftment, skills, economic development, energy, water, wastewater, housing, infrastructure, manufacturing, food security, everything is linked, everything is connected. And we need to understand that. So we can look at the different project developments and do the nice little stuff, upcycling, collection is important. We've got to get these products into the system and start moving it. Understanding problematic fractions, looking at electronic waste, how we can become more sustainable. Tires have massive applications and opportunities in terms of let's not burn it or chuck it into a landfill. How do we structure that? And each of these has their own opportunity. How do we connect? How do we communicate? How do we link and create those connections and ensure that from our supply chain perspective, that we are trying to take the shortest trip between A and B in order to make sure that it makes more sense. So there's a number of different projects one can look at. Low carbon building technology, one of my favorites. I've been discussing that at length in Mauritius, where everything is imported into the country. They don't have cement locally. They don't have steel. So all of this is imported into the country, and yet they're going through a massive growth phase. How do you structure that and look at doing it differently? Looking at the available local resources that you have. And then using the available resources in terms of looking at manufacturing of components and alternative components internally that create jobs in terms of the collection of the waste, the processing of the waste, the management of the waste, and the marketing of that waste into new product development that's going to offset those particular applications. So there's a lot of different ways we can look at that, and we need to also think outside the box. There's new opportunities and applications. South Africa, we produce in the region of 39 million tons of fly ash a year, another 14 million tons of mine slag, and yet that can be an alternative to cement. It can be a low carbon alternative, and there's opportunities which are not rocket science. It's not science fiction either. I mean, these are some of the applications that are used with systems that have up to 95% lower CO2 emissions using available waste materials. So how do we look at the available resources? In Mauritius, for example, we'll be looking at basalt. It's an island. It's a volcanic island. We've got plenty of basalt. What are they doing with it? Well, basically just looking at it as an aggregate. But there's so much more you can do with it to understand the value of those resources. But then understand those problematic systems and how we can look at that in terms of adding value locally. We can't afford landfills. We can't afford to ship materials around. We need to look at offsetting these into new project developments and creating those systems, whether we're turning it into a different product or not. Glass, for example, has some 32 different applications that one can look at, yet largely it's landfill. And it has massive opportunities where we can look at local sustainability through food security programs, nutritional circles, understanding food processing, agri-processing, shortening those trips on food across borders, where we're looking at regenerative agriculture, intensive agriculture, vertical gardening, and change the systems and ways that we've been doing it. So when we try and understand what that circular economy is, it becomes complicated. And I see it all the time. I keep seeing people talking about recycling being the circular economy, and I want to pull my hair out. Okay, I did do that. So the opportunity then is to understand how we look at taking that definition, understanding, we build that into models. And Sneha also showed the famous butterfly model. And I seriously feel like drinking 3 beers after looking at this thing, because it just makes me confused. So how do we take that, break it down into systems that make sense? And in South Africa, Africa, and African countries, it's about how we transition that evolution from a linear to a circular economy and drive that system where we connect the dots and we create these loops and circles. And we can do that in chunks, because often trying to create circular economy is difficult. So we unpack that in terms of life cycle assessment, balance of trade, CSR, socioeconomic upliftment, green procurement, supply chain management, which is what we're talking about today, resource efficiency, and then mapping the impacts and outcomes of those. And each of these is important. So when we're addressing life cycle analysis, what are the real costs behind that? So, if we're landfilling, what are the real costs? What are we losing in terms of a resource? What's it costing us to put that into a landfill? How do we unpack it in terms of jobs that can be created? The opportunity to reduce imports, etc. And if we reduce those imports, how does it impact our balance of trade? How does it affect the health of an economy, the GDP, and the diversity of that economy? Where we can start looking at all those different opportunities and resources within our own boundaries. But then to take some of the work like that done by Prof. Linda Godfrey, I think I saw her on the call earlier. Sorry, Prof, I always use your stuff. But understanding what is that economic value, how we lost those resources and what we've done with them, basically filling them into a hole in the ground, and the cost of putting that hole in the ground, and then the externalities of that. But how do we drive that both on an environmental and a socioeconomic perspective? So that brings us into corporate social responsibility. Again, internally, we need to look at what is going to create that socioeconomic impact locally. Where's that human impact in terms of that circular dimension? And drive those opportunities in terms of enterprise development, supply development that are going to unpack the local supply chain systems. That's going to have positive impacts on our socioeconomics. It's going to look at enterprise development, skills development, and the multiplier effect of that. And then we need to drive that through policy. We need to look at where those different opportunities are and say, how do we promote that secondary resources economy? Incentivize recycling, incentivize businesses acting responsibly. Look at people being committed to their UNFCCC requirements and the scope 1, 2, and 3 reporting. But the supply chain is vitally important to all of that. So how do we look at that inclusive and transformative economic development? Looking at those skills locally, reducing the negative impacts, all three, social, economic, and environmental, and promote the use of materials locally through specifications, bylaws, policy generation, etc., that reduces costs and increases efficiencies. All of these start relating to elements of resource efficiency, how we use less and we live better. And we start to create the opportunities of understanding the impact. And this is what circular economy is all about. The circular economy is not so much about the resources, but the impact in terms of energy, waste, manufacturing, infrastructure, tourism, food, nutrition, education. These are all components that become impacts and outcomes of that circular economy. We need to measure that. We need to make sure that we know what that's all about and how we can unpack each of those different opportunities. And understand that that links into the Sustainable Development Goals. Whether we're talking green economy, blue economy, SDGs, it's all the same thing. So the last slide really is understanding how we look at that supply chain and developing circular economy, looking at the LCA approaches, analyzing the balance of trades, local circular applications for social development, socioeconomic upliftment, balance of trade, green procurement opportunities, and then looking at promoting positive change through supply chain management. We need to make those changes. We need to quantify impacts, resources, and efficiencies. And I think there's a huge amount of opportunities that we in Africa can do. And I've just got off a call, sorry, Paul, I'm going to take 2 seconds with the likes of the European Union, where we need to understand how we work better together. They need the solutions. We've got the resources. How do we look at creating those linkages that's going to impact on the positive development of Africa and ensure that we are looking at a bright future for everybody and that we're not going to pollute the planet. And that's me at 11:30 seconds, so slightly over. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I noticed you didn't tick off peace and justice on your SDG sheet, which I would argue when you talk about resources and trade is probably one of the main drivers of conflict. So if we get this right, it'll take a lot of work, but I think you could tick that one off.
Okay.
Thanks. Beza is going to lead us through a quick Mentimeter. We invite Matthew's going to put the link in chat, and we're going to invite some of your thoughts. So if you have,
yeah, the link to the Mentimeter is on the right side of the chat box. It is time for us to reflect on what actually drives the circular supply chain in your view. We have like 1 minute to reflect on that. Whoa.
So if you're having trouble, just you go to your browser, type menti.com, and then put the code that's in the chat.
Interesting. We have a lot of people mentioning that the business model followed by policy and legislation have a potential to drive the circular supply chain. There are even those who mentioned consumer behavior also leads that. Thank you all for taking time to share your views. So the winner is most likely business models can actually drive circular supply chain. We'll discuss more on that during the discussion session, and followed by consumer information innovation. So thank you all for taking part.
So we'll invite Kelly Rowe, our colleague, to join and provide an additional insight, and then we'll have a discussion between all. Welcome, Kelly.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. Just doing the classic, can you see my screen? Hang on.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, see my screen. Okay, cool.
Hold on, but you're sharing it in notes form.
Oh, that's not good. Hang on.
It might be worth just sharing desktop and then and then going into
Okay.
presentations.
This is bizarre. I had it set up earlier on. Let's just try that once more. If not, then I'm going to plan the. Cool. Can you just see my screen?
You can see your screen?
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Paul. Welcome. It's so great to be here. I was really honored to be asked to speak to everybody today. So, Paul, is it in full screen, or is it?
It's just in slide mode, so you can add.
Oh no,
you've got multiple screens, which always.
Yeah, I've got 2 screens. Can you see a small screen now?
We can see it just in the normal mode.
It's so embarrassing. I'm so sorry, everyone.
It's okay.
Try that again. Now, can you just see my screen?
There we go, full screen.
Okay, cool. Okay, amazing. Well, thanks for inviting me here today. It's always such an honor to engage with this very cool circular economy group. My name's Kelly. I'm based in Cape Town in South Africa. I wear many hats. So I work as an advisor, working as a consultant and coaching, and I work primarily at the Institute of Technology. My background like industrial development in South Africa, and then obviously looking at comparative countries to South Africa. And so, yeah, over the last 2-3 years, I've really just been focused on the space of circularity. So today, what I want to do is chat to you very briefly about reverse logistics, because I'm less interested about what I have to say and more interested about what you have to contribute to this. So before we dive into that, it's been quite an interesting process for me just to reflect on this. We're working on a landscape and mapping exercise in Kenya, mapping out the repair and reuse economy. And it's been quite interesting to see what's surfaced from that work so far. So what I'm going to try to do today is just try and pull through just some of the key things we've learned so far and how that applies into this whole world of like reverse logistics, and what some of the potential barriers and opportunities are that we're seeing. But for those of you who aren't aware of what the reverse logistics is, so just a high-level definition, it's the process of moving goods, basically from the point of consumption to the point of consolidation, for the purpose of capturing value. Now, reverse logistics is not new; it's been around forever. Chanel was talking about lean supply chain manufacturing, lean supply chain models, and that's really great. And yes, there's a huge focus on inventory and inventory control, but this in particular from a circularity perspective is really focusing on like the end. What's happening with the consumer who's using this product? What's happening to the end of the life of that product? And what Chris picked up on, what about tires? Why are tires ending up in our landfills? Why is glass ending up in a landfill? These are incredible materials that can be repurposed or reused into something else. And ultimately, reverse logistics, really importantly, helps us to deal with end of life and that collection process to allow for proper disposal. So think batteries. I would hate to be working in that industry, dismantling batteries. It's a very toxic product to be working with. It's not safe. And most people who deal with that, probably in the continent, aren't offered the right equipment, the right training to be dealing with things like batteries. So when we're looking at really starts to take in the systems approach, well, it should, looking at the product, looking at the process innovation, process systems perspective, looking at the people and the livelihoods, also touching on the where is our material inputs coming from? Where's that destination region? And then what's happening in that region of consumption or usage? So I'm going to share with you this very cool diagram. I like it. Some might not, and it is missing a lot of different things. I acknowledge that, but it's a figure adapted from the World Economic Forum. And one of the areas that really lacks, and I do see it as a huge opportunity when looking at our supply chains, when looking at reverse logistics, is insufficient data. And the data that is available is weak. It's not consistent. So it's not necessarily consistently collected. Some of the information might sit at a product level. Some companies might be sitting on really good info, but across those value chains, across the regions, so global value chains outside of brands, it's really hard to see and understand what's going on. How do we make decisions? So Paul, we spoke about the target audience shows. We want to share and enable and equip like municipalities and cities around the continent. It is, I think it's quite difficult. How do you go into decision-making process with no information? It's mind-blowing. I would battle, and I'd imagine that people in those roles and positions are struggling today right now. But the question on the flip side is, how might we leverage some of the data that can be collected? How could we maybe start thinking about track and trace technologies? There's some great stuff taking place. How might we be able to connect them into the existing value chains to surface and maybe open source some of that information? That could also become another spin on a potential business opportunity going forward. I see Kudoti's in the room. I'd like to chat to you afterwards and see how we could share some of the stuff you collect and share with the broader audience, and maybe make it a little bit more available to the different role players and different stakeholders across the value chains. Products are a huge focus, and understandably, but the products that are being designed are always planned for obsolescence. How have companies made money over all these years? They haven't made it from circular business models. They've made it from linear models: make, consume, distribute, consume, dispose. And it's not our problem. And good luck to the local authorities who have to try and bolster these waste management systems to try and collect all this stuff and then try and work out what goes into landfill, what doesn't. Half the time, we don't even know what's made. Now, what are those component parts? What are the input materials that go into products? It's quite difficult. So on the flip side, we need to start thinking about like circular designs, circular products. And this is quite critical to the reverse logistics process. You can't just say, oh, we're creating a product that's biodegradable. What about it? How is the consumer meant to, what are they meant to do with this product when they're finished with it? Or I no longer need my tires. Where do I take those tires? I don't actually know of a solution here in Cape Town, but maybe that's just my naivety and I haven't spent enough time researching alternative places. But even with cell phones, you think cell phones are great products, they're easily accessible, but there are a lot of cell phones that aren't designed to be fixed. And even those that can be fixed, it's been 12 months since I've registered my phone for repair, and I'm still being told we're waiting for the spare parts. And like, this phone's becoming very quick, and I actually don't know what to do with it anymore. I like the phone, it's just got an issue and I need it fixed, and no one can actually help me, which is quite sad. Then what we've got is we're looking at this is the traditional part that we all know: sourcing, manufacturing, marketing, sales, distribution. But I think going forward, one of the biggest issues that we were faced with, it's capacity building and training. What are the emerging technologies coming into the space? There's some products that are no longer needed, which is great. So I think Kodak film, printing photos, we don't need that anymore. It's been disrupted by applications like Instagram, which is great. But there's still many other products that we will always use and consume for the rest of our lives. I don't think cell phones maybe will disappear forever. I don't think they'll be complete. Maybe they will. Maybe there's somebody who could argue differently. But I do think we will still be dealing with product that's got a hard material value in this world. And we do need to start thinking differently about that. In addition to that, what about funding? I'm not necessarily, and I'd like to hear from everybody later on, what kind of funding models are available for alternative business models that focus on repair, that focus on reuse, that focus on remanufacturing. And even the secondary market, I don't know if a bank would be very keen to start investing or providing a big loan to a business that's saying, I want to move secondhand clothing through local supply chains, as an example. And there's quite a few different things that come into this. What I don't think we do enough is actually ask the question, how does this part of the process connect with, all these parts, connect with the planned and the unplanned economy? There is an incredible amount of actors and people creating livelihood systems in the unplanned economy on the continent. And I often feel that we aren't including them in these conversations. We're talking about these opportunities going forward. We talk about value chain and supply chain localized opportunities. But what about the biggest part of that economy? And those are, it's an unplanned. What are we doing to connect them into these value chains? And not to change their businesses and how they operate, but rather how could we work more closely with them to service them and to provide them with the kind of support and infrastructure to allow for them to thrive. And that's what we've been seeing with some of the work that we've been doing in Kenya, looking at the repair market. It's a huge market. It is thriving, but it's invisible. the support structures that are in place, they're in place for people that are registered in the formal part of the economy. And that's not a Kenyan, it's not a Kenyan problem. This is something that we see across the continent and also across the world. So this isn't a developing context challenge, or however you want to frame it. It really is a challenge around the world. How do we unlock funding? How do we unlock support? How do we unlock capacity building opportunities that make sense and that can create an ecosystem that connects the dots, allows for those in the formal part of the economy to thrive, and allows for those in the informal part of the economy to thrive as well. And not to see the informal economy as, oh, they'll deal with the waste. They'll take our waste and convert it into something else, because that's what they do. And then we still try and barter with the price and negotiate the price down, when those individuals have been working so hard to come up with something very creative and innovative, using materials that are lying around to create products or to improve the life, extending the life of a product to help us enjoy these things going forward. My question really is, how could we unlock this into the future? And then the last two parts, Chris mentioned and touched on these, but it's the collection and the reverse logistics process. So there is inefficient and poorly supported collection systems, and very often the focus is on recycling. Waste management systems driven at the municipal city level, and then really driven, and the focus is around recycling. And when you have these conversations, many people do think that the opportunity is recycling. They don't really understand what is reuse. What do reuse business models look like? What do repair business models look like? What do remanufacturing business models look like? And how could we better support those? Seeing recycling as the last resort should be key. That is critical in how we think about the products and how we design products for circularity. I often hear, packaging is a big one. How can we make it recyclable? Maybe we could challenge the system a bit further. How could we come up with a different system of packaging that shifts away from these tiny, minute packages that are more affordable, and maybe we could come up with something that's a little bit more sustainable. And then lastly, sorting and reprocessing. There's an incredible amount of cell phones on the continent. I learned the other day, and I forgot to add this link in, but we don't actually have the facility to deal with the collection of phones, breaking them down, and then rebuilding them up. So what's happening now is those phones are being collected and then are being, mostly in East Africa, and they're being exported back into Europe for that process, for that kind of value-add activity to take place. And I think that that's a huge lost opportunity. But rather what we should be thinking about here is, how could we identify smaller volume, localized solutions that we could tap into some of these opportunities going forward. And there are some other problematic goods that I don't know if I'm running out of time here, Paul, I think.
Can I nudge you for a minute?
Perfect. There are products that are pretty, I'm going to say it's shitty. They're white goods. We love them. Kettles, toasters, hair dryers. They're not made to last. They kind of enter into the continent. We use them. They've got nowhere to go. And then what do we do with them? And I'd like to challenge this group to really unpack this part of the conversation. How might we think about these products differently? How might we think about how to contribute to policy development and these different support infrastructure opportunities going forward? That is me in a nutshell, and this whole idea of reverse logistics. Paul, thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from everybody else.
Thanks, Kelly. I think we'll start from hearing from people in the group through another mentee. Matthew will throw the link in, and then Beza will guide us through some questions. So as Kelly's hinted, now do these questions resonate, and what further inputs would you like to share? Yeah, over to you, Beza. We've got another half hour in our session today.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah. So the second Mentimeter is online. Feel free to comment on it. Which value chains can bring the highest impact in Africa? Of course, it's not a standalone, but with the hope that it links to the global scene. The majority of respondents said agriculture, followed by built environment and construction. Manufacturing also has a good potential. Still, agriculture persists. So thank you all for reflecting on that. I think it's pretty much clear that agriculture is the majority's view on how agricultural value chain can bring the highest impact in value chains, in developing circular value chains in Africa.
So Linda's challenging our question. What do we mean by impact? Which is very important.
So by impact, we meant by saying that whatever initiatives are taking place or being designed using this sector would actually be a good showcase for a solid circular supply chain. That was what we meant by.
I suppose we're hoping that they'll hit the triple win. It'll be good for our economy, good for our environment, and good for equity.
Mm-hmm. Something like that, yeah. Perfect. I think we can move to the next session of the event, of the webinar. Thank you all for attending this session with us this afternoon. And we do really want to appreciate what the three presenters presented for us. In a bird's eye view, Shona explained to us what are the characteristics of the circular value chains, and an interesting perspective, like imagine yourself in the role of a procurement officer or supply chain manager, and what could you possibly do to improve that? And Chris took us to another angle where unpacking circular economy to understand the procurement and supply chain, to develop a circular supply chain on different possible ways. And Kelly took us into another perspective, saying what are the key lessons she learned from one of the reverse logistics assignments that she has been undertaking. What are the barriers and opportunities that should be undertaken, including insufficient data, technical challenge in the first place, the design of the product being linear in the first place, funding models, collection systems, and sorting and processing of waste. So basically, this is in a nutshell what the three presenters have shared with us this afternoon. So the floor is yours to reflect, comment, suggest any question the three panelists. Thank you. Sharing with us also a good example would be highly beneficial to build the discussion on.
Sorry, it's Duval here. I'm from Stellenbosch Launch Lab. Sorry, my video is not working, but I promise nobody's missing anything at this point in time. I just want to ask the panelists, especially, for instance, Kelly, that's consultant, I think Chris as well. I don't know about you, Snena. Just in respect of when you are consulting to businesses trying to implement certain circularity principles to take them from point A to point B, how much background and how much collateral is there to show a certain return on investment for these businesses? So is there a premium for them going from a normal, let's say a linear business model to a circular business model to be sustainable? Or is it actually a point where they could be more profitable in going to a circular business model? And what type of information can you share with these businesses? Is it case studies? Is it testimonials? What's the type of collateral?
Well, maybe let me start there, Duval. I think It is absolutely essential if one looks at kind of where we are, particularly in the post-COVID environment, that we look at the low-hanging fruit to start off with, where we understand that there is a key economic benefit to moving in the right direction. That could be driven through several different things. One is policy at the moment. If we look at the issue in terms of a local manufacturer trying to get into an international market, if they're not looking at their carbon footprint and their scope 1, 2, and 3 emission reports, and they're not playing the game, they're not going to play in the market. So there's that kind of incentive. But there's what we see often is that corporates are generally just so tied into what they do on a daily basis. That's kind of, this is our knitting, this is what we do, without looking externally and understanding that there's a bigger system that they thrive in, that they work in, and that by interacting with that system in different manners allows them to be able to have a greater impact from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, but definitely from an economic perspective. What we're seeing is that the more difficult components, which maybe might not have a direct economic impact, are often the ones that are more difficult to implement. But I believe that there are enough examples around the world, there's enough opportunities for corporates to look at this in the right manner to really make sure that they make a positive financial impact in terms of their own sustainability. If you think about it, sustainability is about making sure your company is going to survive the next 20 or 30 years. So that's important, and you're not going to do that by losing money. So do the right things, get the low-hanging fruit, make sure that it has a positive economic impact, and then we can start on the tough things. So let's not think about the tough things first. Let's look at where we can actually make some moolah. Everybody's happy, and you can get CEOs and financial directors to sign it off without sweating too much.
I'm going to quickly add on to that, Chris. I think what I like to, because it's a hard journey, and I think also what businesses have gone through, we've all gone through with COVID. Working capital is quite limited at this moment, at this stage, and businesses have really had to prioritize, and it makes sense because it's that or having to offload a lot of staff. What I do encourage them to do is to not go on this journey on their own. Who are your key customers that you service, and bring them into the room and let's have a conversation. And I find that it's many iterations of that conversation. It's an education awareness process as well. And in that, it sparks these ideas, and also share nuggets. So case studies do help. Share nuggets, share inspirational examples with them to see, well, how might we maybe bring something like that into our value chain, our localized value chain. More often, if it's South Africa, your import regions play a huge role in how, local activity and what can take place. For some industries like chemicals, to some extent, even textiles, clothing, leather, footwear. And I think what's really important there, bring the right people into the room, have the right conversations, and then see, to Chris's point, what is the lowest lying fruit opportunity across our strategic partnership that we could unlock. Let's test with each other. Let's fail and learn and build. And I also encourage them not to claim anything until it's been proven. So don't try and use this as a PR exercise, because then you're also in it for the wrong reasons. And then those are kind of clients that I just prefer not to work with. I'll find somebody with a bit more swinging abilities and help them see the light, as opposed to I'm not prepared to dance on a journey that just isn't about what we're really working towards into the future. And then, the other question I like to throw at them, how can you bring your employees and your staff with you on this journey? Because I think that plays a huge role as well.
Thank you. Fuad, I think I saw your hand up, no? Or you change your mic.
There's a question from Gift in the chat.
Okay. Question to everyone from the panel. I'm curious to know what the practical steps we can take starting to accelerate the involvement of informal market. So this one is interesting.
Yeah, so, Gift. Let me. Sorry, Kelly, you go first.
Go for it. No, go for it.
Yeah, Gift. There's always a difficulty in terms of how that's structured, and the reality is that often corporates will not look at that element of it. but we need to change our mindset. So a key element from my perspective would be like the mining sector. Now, the mining sector is for example, a huge impact on the planet, negatively, generally. What happens is you create a big hole where you're digging stuff out of that hole, and you end up with this social development around that because there's jobs, there's access. So you end up with these villages and communities developing around a mine. But then when the mine closes, there's nothing there for them. And a lot of what we're doing now is we're talking to those sort of corporates to get them to understand their supply chains, looking at where their supplies are coming in from, where their skills are coming in from, that local community can become a supplier both in and out from that environment. And there's many ways of doing that that are beneficial to both. So whether you're looking at a mine or whether you're looking at an eco-estate development, they're all nubs of absolute wealth where you are surrounded by abject poverty. And the opportunity to bring in that community development where you're looking at your informal collectors, you're trying to take them through the different process, you're looking at the supply chains, whether it's agriculture or services or building, or bring them in and incorporate them into that thing. Generally, what we try and do is we tend to think of it as an afterthought. So we look at corporate social responsibility as right, we made $1 billion. We need to actually be responsible now. We need to change that. We've got to be responsible to start off with and make sure that that becomes part of the vision and structure of the company going all the way through. And that's how we're going to change lives and futures, is by thinking about it first and not afterwards.
I'll just go ahead, Kelly.
No, go for it, Shannon.
No, I'll just want to build up on what Chris was saying, but one, as he mentioned, very important to map out our supply chains, where exactly your materials are sitting, what each tenet of supply chain is looking like. And one thing that industries definitely should focus on, and I've been actually talking about it at multiple forums, is why don't we have a secondary sourcing material marketplace wherein industries can actually come in and share their waste, and then say, for example, I am a fruit manufacturer, so I have a ton of fruit waste coming out of my industry, and then say for example, Kelly is manufacturing apparel, and so she can actually look in opportunities where maybe my fruit waste could help in making any clothes or making some cool bags. So, bringing waste streams together and maybe having a marketplace someday would actually make it easier for industries to find the secondary source of materials. And at the same time, you never know, going back to the previous question we had, it could actually be cheaper and then add more economic value. You then start talking about profit. So that's why it's so important that whatever role we are in, we look for opportunities to make this happen. And I do believe that, like, even in today's state, we could actually make smaller shifts to our strategy to see how we can contribute to this initiative.
Just give what I would encourage you to do.
I'm actually coming back.
That's perfect.
Sorry, continue, Kelly.
Just bring the people that you want to work with into the room and talk to them about this whole prototype process, this whole idea that you've got. Test the idea, test and build with them. Maybe even allow for contributors to that thinking to be like super users of your platform going forward, or something. I think that there's so much more to gain by that. It's a very hard conversation because I know there's a lot of trust issues. Who are you? Why are we doing this? What does it mean? Increased visibility to the formal part of our economy, where people know how to operate, what my turnover is, all those good things. But I would encourage you to do that, and then maybe look at how you could use all that data that you do collect in a more meaningful way, to then engage with like ecosystem stakeholders who could potentially help you to move some of your thinking forward at the same time.
Thank you.
I believe Paul, go ahead, please.
We have a question. Yeah, you saw it, good. Then it's for you.
Paul had a question about predictability, and please let me know if I answer your question.
Make sure that
predictable, especially with circular economy, and when we were most of us were talking about how we should looking into localizing our supply chains and actually bringing your supply base closer, that actually improves your predictability, wouldn't it, right? Because now you have better understanding of where your materials are, you're able to map it, and imagine your lead times. They immediately go down. So your customer servicing ability and your service levels automatically improve. And so that's why when you are in circular economy, when you have your supply chains in a circular model, your predictability automatically improves. Your dependency on forecast, imagine like living a world where you do not have to depend on forecast. We faced the utmost disruptions when COVID hit, and none of us were actually capable enough to forecast in a pandemic like situation. So every single industry was struggling there. And so if we look, and that's when many companies actually started strategizing in bringing a reshoring of nearshoring of their supply base. And so bringing everything together, like I was sharing, where you actually co-locate factories together, your predictability automatically improves and your dependency on forecast goes down, which ultimately improves your customer experience.
Thank you, Kelly. Tina, sorry.
Thanks, Kelly. That's a great point.
Yeah, we saw with the additional points you made on the chat box. Also, capacity plays a key role. Any other points, reflections? We have like 3 minutes, and we can still reflect on the topics. Sharing examples would also be good.
Can I ask a question, Bezan?
Yes.
I'm quite keen. How might we contribute as a circular economy community? And it doesn't matter where we sit in this space, you know, what our role actually is and contribution is, but how will we continue this? The conversation of supply chains is so important. It's huge. There's a lot of granularity that we can get into. There's some incredible examples that we can start surfacing that speaks into value chains, supply chains on the continent. How might we, or how would everybody want to be involved going forward?
I mean, for starters, this session is part of a 6-series event. So we'll try to address the bits and parcels of each key components that we think are relevant in each series. But I would say maybe set up a platform for a last event where all the points are really consolidated with the concrete recommendations, I would say.
Cool.
I think Beza's line has just dropped. But yes, to add on that, we've got 5 more editions, so to speak, of the series of inputs.
Yes, I am here. Yes, I don't.
And consolidating them at the end, what we're aiming to produce as a team is a document that consolidates the lessons. We're definitely producing one primarily targeted to local government. If there are useful insights, and I think there are great insights for running your own business, we'd like to put something like that together as well. So that's in our minds to have as the outcome of this process. By participating here, you can also aid us by filling in the survey and noting what was one key thing that you learned that you think is important. I know something that sparked in my mind was that the question of what are banks financing? And I've seen this in food systems, and I hadn't thought to connect this over to circular economy work, but working perhaps with local governments or national governments to work with banks to guarantee loans, revolving loans, or investment just popped as something which I'd be really excited to explore further. So that's my learning from today. So thank you very much for sparking that. Beza, did you want to close the session or ask additional inputs?
No, I'm good. But there is a 2 to 3 minute survey that we would like you to fill in, just to see that we are on the right track of addressing your needs. It's still on the right side of the chat box. Other than that, thank you all for coming, and it was such a productive afternoon, I would say.
Thanks so much, Beza. A big thank you to our partners in the ACE Africa project, which are the African Circular Economy Network, Stellenbosch University Launch Lab, funded by the Embassy of Finland to South Africa. And we're really glad to have hosted a number of ACE Africa entrepreneurs. We're hoping to engage further with you. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day further, and see you on March 1st for our next one.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul, Beza, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
Okay.